In the spring of 1873, Thomas Whitmore sat in his modest ranch house on the edge of the Arizona Territory, carefully composing what he hoped would be the most important letter of his life. He was a practical man, 42 years old, with graying temples and weathered hands that spoke of years spent working the unforgiving desert soil. His ranch was small but profitable, his character respectable, and his loneliness absolute. After 15 years of bachelor life on the frontier, he had finally decided to do what many isolated settlers did in those days. He would seek a mail-order bride. Thomas had seen the advertisement in the San Francisco newspaper, brought to him by a traveling merchant. The Westward Matrimonial Agency promised to connect respectable gentlemen of the frontier with refined ladies seeking new opportunities in the West. The advertisement featured elegant script and a small illustration of a demure woman in a fashionable dress. Thomas imagined someone petite and gentle, perhaps a schoolteacher or a merchant's daughter fallen on hard times, someone who would bring culture and grace to his rough existence. He spent 3 evenings crafting his letter, describing his property, his prospects, and his character in the most favorable terms possible. 2 months later, he received a reply. The agency informed him that they had found a suitable match, a woman named Nailnish, described as strong, capable, and experienced in frontier life. The letter mentioned that she was of native heritage but had been educated in Eastern schools and was fully conversant in English and civilized customs. Thomas felt a moment of hesitation at the mention of native heritage, but the agency assured him she was of good character and exceptionally suited to the demands of ranch life. They included a small fee for arrangement and travel expenses, which Thomas paid without hesitation, his imagination already conjuring images of a modest, hard-working companion who would share his simple life. The day of her scheduled arrival, Thomas drove his wagon to the nearest stage stop, 20 miles from his ranch. He had bathed, trimmed his beard, and worn his best Sunday clothes. In his wagon, he had placed a bundle of wildflowers and a new quilt he had purchased from a traveling merchant, gifts to welcome his bride. His heart hammered with nervous anticipation as the stagecoach appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind it like a wedding veil. The stage pulled to a stop, and the driver climbed down, giving Thomas an odd look that the rancher couldn't quite interpret. Then the door opened, and Thomas Whitmore's entire world tilted on its axis. What emerged from that stagecoach was not the delicate, refined lady he had imagined. Instead, a woman of absolutely extraordinary proportions stepped down, and then continued stepping down, rising to her full height of 7 feet and 2 inches. Nailnish stood before him in the afternoon sun, a vision that contradicted everything Thomas had expected. She wore a combination of Apache and frontier clothing. A long leather skirt decorated with traditional beadwork, a simple cotton blouse that strained against her powerful shoulders, and a leather vest. Her arms were thick with muscle, her hands large and capable. Her face was beautiful in its own way, with high Apache cheekbones, intelligent dark eyes, and long black hair braided with silver ornaments. She carried a single worn traveling bag and regarded Thomas with an expression that mixed dignity, defiance, and something that might have been amusement. Thomas stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the flowers dangling forgotten from his hand. The stagecoach driver coughed awkwardly, accepted payment for the delivery, and departed with unseemly haste, leaving the mismatched pair standing in a cloud of settling dust. For a long moment, neither spoke. Thomas's mind raced through a dozen responses, none of them adequate to the situation. He had expected delicate. He had received magnificent. He had anticipated refinement. He had been sent power incarnate. Finally, Nailnish spoke, her voice deep and melodious, her English perfect with only the slightest accent. "You are Thomas Whitmore. The agency said you needed a strong woman for ranch life. I am very strong." There was a hint of challenge in her tone, as if she were daring him to send her back, as if she expected rejection and had armored herself against it. Thomas swallowed hard, his mind working to reconcile expectation with reality. Years of frontier pragmatism warred with his shock. He looked at this giant woman, at the pride in her bearing despite the obvious absurdity of the situation, and something in him shifted. He thought of the loneliness of his ranch, of the back-breaking work that consumed his days, of the long silent evenings with only his own thoughts for company. He thought of the courage it must have taken for her to answer such an advertisement, knowing full well that she was not what any man expected. "Yes, I'm Thomas," he managed finally. "Welcome to Arizona Territory, Miss Nailnish. The ranch is a ways off. We should get started before dark." He gestured to the wagon, uncertain how else to proceed. Nailnish nodded once, her expression unreadable, and moved to place her bag in the wagon bed. When she lifted it, Thomas noticed she did so with one hand, as easily as he might lift a book. The ride back to the ranch was awkward and mostly silent. Thomas tried several times to start conversation, asking about her journey, about the agency, about her background. Nailnish's responses were brief but not impolite. She had been raised by Apache parents until she was 12, when missionaries had taken her to a school in New Mexico. She had learned English, arithmetic, and what the missionaries called civilization. When she returned to her people, she found she belonged fully to neither world. She was too Apache for white society, too changed by white education for complete acceptance among her tribe. The matrimonial agency had seemed like a solution, a way to forge a new path. As they talked, Thomas began to notice things beyond her extraordinary size. She had an intelligence in her eyes that spoke of quick understanding. Her hands, though large and strong, moved with a certain grace. When she pointed out a hawk circling overhead, there was something almost poetic in how she described its flight pattern. By the time they reached his ranch, Thomas's initial shock had begun to evolve into something more complex. Curiosity, respect, and the first stirrings of an idea that perhaps the agency had not made a mistake after all, merely a different kind of match than he had imagined. The ranch house seemed to shrink when Nailnish entered it. The doorframe, built for average-sized men, required her to duck. The furniture, which had always seemed adequate to Thomas, looked like children's pieces beside her. She surveyed the modest main room, the simple kitchen, the bedroom beyond, and Thomas watched her face for signs of disappointment or disdain. Instead, he saw assessment, the look of someone evaluating a situation and determining how to make it work. "The bed will not fit me," she said simply. "I will need to build a larger one. The door frames should be raised. Do you have tools and timber?" Her tone was matter-of-fact, already problem-solving rather than complaining. Thomas found himself nodding. "Yes, I have both. I can help you." "I can do it myself," Nailnish interrupted, not rudely but with quiet confidence. "I have built many things. Tomorrow I will start. Tonight, I will sleep outside. I prefer it anyway. The sky is better company than a roof." That first evening was strange beyond anything Thomas had experienced. He prepared dinner, uncertain of the protocol for a mail-order bride who was neither timid nor conventional. Nailnish ate with good manners but enormous appetite, consuming 3 times what Thomas did and complimenting his cooking with genuine appreciation. After dinner, she excused herself and went outside, and Thomas watched through the window as she spread a blanket under the stars and lay down, seemingly content with the vast sky as her ceiling. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of sawing. He emerged from the house to find Nailnish had already been to his timber pile, selected the board she needed, and was methodically constructing what appeared to be a bed frame of extraordinary proportions. She worked with efficient skill, measuring by eye, cutting with precision. Thomas offered to help, and this time she accepted, and they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Thomas and Nailnish developed a partnership that, while not the romantic union he had originally imagined, proved far more valuable. Nailnish's strength was not just physical, though that was remarkable. She could lift loads that would have required 2 men, repair fences in half the time, and work from dawn to dusk without complaint. But more than that, she had an intuitive understanding of the land, of animals, of the rhythms of frontier life that surpassed his own. She taught him Apache techniques for finding water in seemingly dry earth. She showed him how to read weather patterns in ways his almanac never could. She could track animals with uncanny skill and had knowledge of desert plants that could serve as medicine or food. The ranch began to thrive in ways it never had under Thomas's sole management. Neighbors who came to visit, initially shocked by Nailnish's appearance, left impressed by her capabilities and her no-nonsense demeanor. But Thomas also began to understand the pain beneath Nailnish's stoic exterior. She had answered the mail-order bride advertisement not out of romantic hope but out of desperate pragmatism. She had been rejected by dozens of men, mocked in towns, feared by those who saw her size as monstrous rather than magnificent. The agency had finally convinced Thomas to accept her by describing her in terms that obscured the truth, betting that frontier practicality would overcome initial shock. One evening, about 3 months after her arrival, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas had never formally proposed marriage, and Nailnish had never pressed the issue. They had fallen into a domestic arrangement that was part business partnership, part companionship, and entirely unconventional. "You know," Thomas said carefully, "when I sent for a mail-order bride, I had different expectations." Nailnish turned to look at him, her expression guarded. "I know. You wanted someone small and delicate. Someone who would make you feel strong and needed. I am sorry I am not that woman." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I'm not. Oh, at first, I'll admit, I was shocked. Probably more than I've ever been in my life. But these months together, Nailnish, you've made this ranch better than it's ever been. More than that, you've made my life better. You're strong where I'm weak, skilled where I'm ignorant. You challenge me to be better, work harder, think differently." He paused, gathering his courage. "I didn't get the bride I ordered. I got something far more valuable. A true partner. If you're willing, I'd like to make this arrangement permanent. Not because you're what I expected, but because you're what I needed, even if I didn't know it." Nailnish was quiet for a long moment, and in the fading light, Thomas saw something glisten in her eyes. "I have been rejected many times," she said softly. "For being too big, too strong, too Apache, too different. I answered your advertisement expecting nothing, hoping for little. I thought perhaps you would let me work for my keep, and I could at least have a place to belong." She turned to face him fully. "You are not the man I expected either, Thomas Whitmore. I expected someone who would fear me or try to dominate me. Instead, I found someone who sees me, truly sees me, not as a giant or a curiosity, but as a person. Yes, I will marry you. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose to stay." They married in a simple ceremony in town, causing considerable gossip and no small amount of scandal. But Thomas and Nailnish didn't care. They had found in each other something that no carefully worded advertisement could have matched. Genuine partnership, mutual respect, and a love built not on fantasy but on the solid foundation of shared work and shared life. Years later, their ranch became known throughout the territory, not just for its prosperity but for the extraordinary couple who ran it. Thomas Whitmore had ordered a delicate mail-order bride and received a giant Apache woman instead. And in that cosmic mismatch, both found exactly what they needed: belonging, purpose, and a love that transcended expectations to become something far more real and enduring than either had dared to hope.